So the most popular reel on the market is going to be a spinning reel. And when you've fished as long as I have, you've run into a lot of the common problems that all of you are going to run into or have run into. And so today what I'm going to talk about is the 5 biggest mistakes that I see people making with a spinning reel. And to start it off, we have a couple of gimmies right off the bat. And the first is, when you hold a spinning reel, it is meant to be held like this and reeled facing down. So when I'm reeling that bait, that reel is down, because we have all seen guys have it upside down and reeling it backwards. If you're reeling it backwards because your dominant hand is on the other side, what you can do is unscrew the reel and screw it into the other side. They all come with a small cap on this other side. You can unscrew this, unscrew the reel, because they just screw in backwards. You can see that pops right off, and you can unscrew it just like so, and then slide it into the other side and screw it in on the other side. And what that'll do is that will make it to where you can actually reel it with your dominant hand. So tip number 2 actually deals with putting line on the reel, because if you've tried to put line on a reel, there's 2 things that I see people do wrong all of the time with it. And the first is they try to put the line on the reel wrong. And you'll know you did this because your line will be all kinds of twisted up every time you try to cast it. Your line will just be twisting on itself over and over again. So the way you reel one of these reels, the spool always spins clockwise. If you watch how that spins, it always spins clockwise. And so if you try to put your line on the reel clockwise onto a clockwise reel, what's going to happen is your line is going to twist. And you'll notice you're doing it because as soon as you're taking it off the spool, it's constantly trying to twist on itself. So you want to put it on backwards so that way it comes off clockwise again. So when you're taking it off the spool, just watch how you're putting it on there and make sure it's coming off the opposite way as it's going onto the spool. That is one of the biggest mistakes that I see people doing. The other big mistake that I see people doing with fishing line when they're spooling it on here is they try to put too heavy of fluorocarbon or monofilament onto a small spinning reel. If you look at the diameter of most spools, how they come versus the diameter of your spool, they're 2 completely different diameters. And so thinner line actually mends and actually flexes and will form to the spinning reel better than thicker line will. So if I'm putting line on a spinning reel for freshwater applications and I'm getting above 10 pound, consider switching to braided line. Because braided line is so supple, it doesn't hold any of the memory like monofilament or fluorocarbon will. So 10 pound is about the most that I will spool just fluorocarbon or monofilament onto that spool, because any thicker than that and it tries to hold that memory, and you'll know it because as soon as you open your bail, your line just bursts off the reel and goes everywhere and creates a mess. If that's happening to you, there's a couple ways you can solve it. The first is you can put braid on there and tie braid to a fluorocarbon leader, so that way you don't have to waste all of that monofilament or fluorocarbon. The second thing you can do is you can actually heat the line up on your spool. And to do this, you spool all your line on there, and then you take your spool and you put it into hot water. Not necessarily boiling water, but hot water, because what that's going to do is that's going to allow that line to form onto there. You can also put a reel cure on there. They make it in a bunch of different sprays. All you have to do is spray it on there, and that will also help the line form to your spool. But if you don't do any of those things, you're going to run into the same problem where that line just tries to pop off of your spool and it's going to create a mess. I've tried it. It doesn't work if you try to do it any other way. So instead of leaving you guess, I'm going to walk you through my entire spooling process so that way you guys can see what I'm doing, so that way you guys don't make the same mistakes I did. And at the end of the spooling process, if you did mess up, I will also tell you how to fix it, because it's not as bad as it seems. If you get line twist, it's not the end of the world, and there are a couple surefire ways to fix it. But first, I'm going to show you how to spool a reel. So the first thing that I do is I take my spool, and if you're using fluorocarbon or monofilament, I actually tie a knot directly to the spool, because the line will stretch, and so it won't slide at all. Now, if you're using braid, use tape. Never try to tie a knot directly to the spool if you're putting braid directly on a spool, because what will happen is that braid will spin. It doesn't cinch because there's no stretch. You can't stretch it to the spool, so you have to set it on the spool or put a knot on there and then tape that knot down and let the line run on top of the knot, because if you don't, that braid will spin no matter what reel you put it on, no matter how well you do it, it will spin. So all I'm going to do is take my knot, or take my line, bring it down, and then you would tie your favorite knot around the spool. For me, what I like to do is I actually, let's see if I can get you guys focused in on this. is I will actually take and wrap around the spool like so, and then I will tie a knot to the line. I just usually use an improved clinch knot. Doesn't have to be that tight because most oftentimes you never actually get down to the spool anyway. So I just tie a weak little knot, and if you watch when I tighten that down, it will actually slide down onto that spool, and then you can trim your excess, and bam, there you're ready to go. Now when it comes to actually spooling the line, this is where it gets complicated, and this is where it got complicated. You want it to come off clockwise or counterclockwise because it goes onto the reel clockwise. If you look at how a reel spins, it spins clockwise, so you want the line coming off the opposite, so that way it's not trying to undo itself. And so if you just watch how the line comes off of the spool, you want it to come off counterclockwise. So that will be the way you're doing it right. How you can also do it is just hold it straight and have it coming off of the spool straight. And to do this, there's a couple ways. You could do the old pencil trick, which works all right, or you could just simply throw this big spool in a body of water and reel it straight off the spool. That's usually what I do because I'm generally out in a boat when I'm spooling a reel, and I don't usually have somebody else there to hold it for me. But that is how I usually spool a reel. And the thing is, you never want to overfill it, so I usually leave about a 1/16 of an inch gap. I usually fill it up to right about where it's just about going to peel over, and then I stop. And I'll actually do a video on the right and wrong ways to spool a reel and all the ins and outs of it here in a couple weeks, but for now, we're just going to touch on a little bit of it. Let's talk about if you spooled it on the wrong way and you're getting all of that nasty line twist. How do you get it out? It's pretty easy. If you're in a boat, what I will do is I will actually take every lure off of it. I will just let line out until I am down to a bare spool, and then you reel it back up. Simple as that. Get all of it off of there, and then reel it back up because there'll be so much line twist that it'll actually undo itself while you're reeling it in. Now, if you don't have that, if you're just at your house, what you can do, and what I've done before, is I will actually just go in my yard, and I will just go back and forth through the yard, letting line out, letting the friction of the grass catch it. But the key is to get all of the line off of your spool, so that way it's going to get that line twist out of there. Now, if you're having problems with your line, one thing that my dad always showed me, if you're having problems with your line conforming to your spool and you don't have line conditioner, and let's say you're not around a pot of water to try to boil, try to heat it up to constrict it to that, what you can do is take a heavier weight and tie it to the end of your line. Once you fill your spool up, take like a 1/4 ounce split shot or a 1/4 ounce sinker, tie it to the end of your line, go out into the yard and cast it as far as you can and reel it in holding it, because as you're holding it, it'll heat up in your hand and it will conform to the size of your spool. That was what I always used to do growing up, and it worked out great for me because as you reel it in and you're holding your fingers on it, it would constrict. And you do that about 10-15 times, and then bam, your line is conformed to your spool and you're good to go, and you won't get any of that over hop where it's trying to pop off of there, and you won't have that line twist in there. So another big problem that I see with line on spinning reels is going to be what they call wind knots, or getting knots in your line. When you go to cast, you end up having 3 lines coming off of it instead of 1, or you end up with a loop stuck in your line. That's all because when you make a cast, you need to, you open your bail, make the cast. What you need to do is grab your line, manually close your bail. If you don't manually close your bail and pull your line into that guide, you're going to get what's called a wind knot because it's just the line running over itself. One of the things that I always tell people is never try to close the bail on its own, because that doesn't put the line in the right place. You would think that would be how it would work because it's made to do that, but if you try that every time, sooner or later, it's going to bite you because that line is not going to set right, and it's going to end up causing a loop in your line or a bigger loop in your line, which is going to create a headache for you on the water. So to stop that, when you make that cast, open your bail, cast it, pull your line and close it. Make sure that line is seated into this groove and you won't have that problem again. So the last problem that I see with spinning rods is actually the spinning rod connected to the reel. Too oftentimes I see people using the wrong rod for what they're trying to do. They go and buy a combo rod at Walmart or wherever you happen to buy it, and they buy one that's either too stiff or too soft. And so a combo rod is great when you're first starting out, but as you start to get into more specialized areas with baits, So don't forget, guys, I will have my favorite rod and reel for a spinning reel linked down below, so that way you guys can get it. All of the links you see down below are actually affiliate links that I'm connected to that I directly benefit from. So if you guys are planning on buying a spinning reel or a spinning rod or some of the components that go into it, please use that link so that way you can benefit me and benefit the channel so I can keep making more videos for you guys. Too often, people try to use that one rod for everything. And so if you're trying to throw a topwater frog on the same rod you're trying to throw a wacky rig Senko on, something's not lining up there. So you need to have stiffer rods for the rods that need it, and then you also need to have softer rods for the applications that require it. And so I'll have a link down below to some of my favorite rods for some of my different techniques as far as whether you're throwing heavier stuff on it or lighter stuff. But a good all-around go-to is a 7-foot 7-1 medium heavy. That will be able to do pretty much everything, but if you're throwing a medium light, you're going to be restricted on what you can do because you're not going to be able to put the hook where you need it to or be able to fight fish the way you need it to. So as always, we're going to end this with a Bible verse. I don't have my actual Bible. We're going to be using my phone right here. But the Bible verse that I want to talk about today is 2 Corinthians 5:7. And it says, it's very simple. It says, "For we live by faith, not by sight." And I think that's a really, really big one because too oftentimes we try to live by things that you can see, the physical world, and not by what you know is right and what you know in your heart. And so if you're living the physical world and you're living by the things you can physically see and that's all you're putting your faith in, you're going to get burned, guys. You need to trust the Lord even though you can't see him, because he's what's going to guide you home. He's what's going to get you to everlasting life because he's always there for you guys. So if you have any questions or comments on, where do you start? How do you get, back into the faith? Feel free to shoot me a message, shoot a comment down below, and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. But I really appreciate you guys following along the channel. If you haven't already, be sure to hit that subscribe button to keep following along and hit that like and that share button to, spread the love, guys. But I appreciate y'all so much. Thank you so much for watching, and I can't wait to see you guys in the next video.